Hi everyone, hope all you guys are doing good. And today we are going to talk on the topic which is considered to be the most hot and interesting topic when it comes to mail flow. And we are going to be discussing on this topic as if what is SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records within Office 365 and how does it works simultaneously with the EOP filtering services. So just before we get started on with this topic, let me introduce to you about myself. So my name is Rizwan and I am one of the senior consultants with Alif Consulting, and let's get started with this video where we will be discussing SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records within Office 365. So why there's a need of SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records? What these records do for us, and why there's a need for to be able to get it done? So this these three terminologies or the technologies in over here have been broadly and widely discovered when spammings with email got started. It was quite a battle where the email started get started to flow, and when there was email sent across various organizations, whether it is about sending emails or receiving emails. So for from receiving's perspective or from receiving's point of view, it was quite a big challenge that whenever someone is to be receiving emails from some specific sender, whether it would be an external sender. So at that time there was to be a separate check flow, and it was been pretty easy or pretty easy to manipulate that by adding just DNS records. One can easily send on spam emails and can easily take in those emails into the recipient's mailbox server. So to overcome this, Microsoft came up with this feature. Ideally we can say Microsoft being coming up with this feature, or these are the records. These are basically the external DNS records which needs to be published, and these three records are being specific when it comes to email service. So irrespective of whether you would be using email services with vendors like Gmail, that is for Google, for Yahoo, for Domino, or even for Microsoft, anywhere you would be using your email services, literally and eventually you need to be able to publish these three records so that you should be able to uh, make your environment secure, more secure, by adding these three records. Now, how to be able to get these three records in over here, and how to be able to check for those messages, we are going to look for that widely from emails perspective or from emails point of view. Now, we'll start with the SPF record. What does an SPF record means, or what is a sender policy framework, and how does it works with, and what is to do with that? So, in order to be able to understand these three records or any one of it, we need to first understand that whenever we purchase a domain, let's say if I've purchased a domain called as nori12.com. So in order to make my domain email secure or email proof, I need to get these three records published within Office 365 within my external DNS, so that whenever someone tries to send me an email, they check that these three records have been published by me, and they can consider myself as a secure sender. Now I would let you know how to be able to get these things checked. Let's say I have a domain called as nudi12.com. I have purchased the domain, the nudi12.com domain from GoDaddy, and I need to add that domain in Office 365 environment and services as well. So I would be publishing this record. So the thing is, you publish these records onto your site, but it is always checked at the other side. Getting the point? When you're publishing this record at your site, so let's say I would be publishing an SPF record for nori12.com. So it would be simply into the format of include.spf.protection.outlook.com. So this is an FQDN which is provided to you by Microsoft. So this value in over here, spf.protection.outlook.com, it is usually being published with an FQDN which has hundreds and thousands of IP addresses at the backend given by Microsoft, because on each and every domain purchased in Microsoft 365, the FQDN is going to be the same. That is SPF protection.outlook.com, and beneath that there would be hundreds and lakhs and thousands of IP addresses associated with Microsoft tenant, which means that only those specific IP addresses are to be able to send emails on this domain, and this domain is associated with Office 365. Now let me give you a quick example to be able to get this understand. So unlike I have my email address, that is rizwan at noori12.com, and if I have a proper SPF record added to noori12.com, so how it goes is I would be sending an email to user1 at gmail.com. That would go with gmail.com. So I have sent that email to Noori user1 at gmail.com. So how it would go is my email would travel and it would get out from my environment, and it would go to the recipient, that is gmail.com. It would check for the mx record for gmail.com. Now once the email reaches through external DNS, it would check that yes, the mx record for gmail does exist, and I would hand over this email to Gmail, and Gmail would then check that whether in the Gmail's server if user1 exists and if user1 has a valid mailbox. So once it reaches the email servers for Google, then Google's spam filter would come into the picture. Now what it would do is Google spam server, the very first thing it would check is the SPF record. I'm sorry, if the SPF record for Nuri 12 is published or not. So meaning you added this record at your site, but this record actually got published at the actually got checked at the recipient site. Bear with me. Mhm. Thank you for being there. So how this record is going to be getting checked is once Gmail received the email sent from nuri12.com, which is added in Office 365 or in Microsoft. So Gmail is going to check whether the SPF record for nuri12.com is published or not. If the SPF record for nuri12.com is published, and if within that SPF record, if the IP address is, I have checked the IP address that I would only be accepting the email coming from authorized Microsoft IP. If the email is not from the authorized Microsoft, so Microsoft is giving the authority to the recipient, so that any email which is coming from the IP addresses which is provided by Microsoft, so only allow emails to enter the other organization if it is being allowed by Microsoft as a valid sender. If the email is not being a part of the valid senders, then it would be dependent on the recipient's spam filter policy, as if what needs to be done with the specific email, whether that email needs to be rejected, whether that email needs to be allowed into their organization. So this all thing happens only if your SPF gets passed. If your SPF gets passed, directly the email would be entered into the recipient's inbox folder. If you see that the recipient have not configured these settings, so irrespective of whether you would be configuring it or not, the email would still go to his inbox or to his junk or spam items, depending on what all configuration is being made at the recipient side. So this is all about SPF. What all options do you have with SPF? Okay, I'll also be discussing those options with you in and over here as well. There is a limitation with SPF that you can only perform up till 10 lookups or 10 hops. Now what is this? I'll quickly be giving as an example, but before you go on with that example, let me check with this option, which would be giving you an idea as if what does SPF does. So if you would see in with this option, the record would always look alike. Let me open this. So we'll do an NS lookup. That is actually a txt record which gets in published in the external DNS. So what I would do is I would do a txt record pull up for the SPF record, and my domain's name would be T, because I have recently purchased this domain and added it one of my tenant within Office 365. So it would be tdom.xyz. I purchased this domain from GoDaddy, and I have the IP. If you see in this, this is the record. You see SPF one.include.spf.protection.outlook.com, where it says hyphen all. So what does this hyphen means? I'll quickly show you that first, and I'll walk you back again on this page. So when it says hyphen, it actually means hard fail. Now what does hard fail means? Mark the messages with hard fail in the message that the email is only being authorized to send emails through valid senders. If it is a soft fail, it would be a tilde, and if it would be neutral, it would mean that do not do anything with that email. You can just allow that email. If you would do it as a soft fail, it would be on the recipient side, whether the recipient would allow that email to be entered to their organization or they would block it. Now, similar things would be explained in over here. You see, hyphen all indicates hard fail. If you know all the authorized IP addresses of your domain, so what we would be defining when I've added this record under tdom.xyz, so I have given the authority to this domain, and this one would be reflected at the recipient side as well. The recipient would check if it is a hyphen all, so only the IP addresses which are present into that FQDN, only with those IP addresses the emails are going to get accepted. If it does not contains hyphen, and it, let's say if it would be a hyphen all, so it is like indicate software, and we are not being sure about that as if what would be the IP addresses containing with that. So in that case, it totally depends on the recipient side server, as if the recipient is going to allow that email, is going to reject it, or is it going to block it. And if it would be a neutral, that would be indicated with the help of question all. In that case, it would just be neutral, it would not do anything, and it is simply not being recommended if you see over here. So these are the three actions which are being set by the SPF record. Now I told you something about hop. You see this? So this is the basic SPF record which gets in published. So irrespective of even if you have like millions of domains in Microsoft 365, so the value for that would always be this, that is v is equal to SPF1 and include spf.protection.outlook.com. In case if you are using any of your on-premises server or your printer through which you would like to send emails, so that printer's IP address gets added in this format, that v is equal to spf1 ip4 colon the IP address and included with this. So it means that I am allowing this IP address if any email is coming through this IP address, and this would be and, because there are two includes, and if the second condition would be this, then please allow the connections coming from these IP addresses, and we would be publishing this in the external DNS. So this is external DNS where we see that the IP addresses have been added. Now what I would do is, if you need to check the backend behind this and how many IP addresses are there beneath this FQDN. So this is basically called as FQDN, fully qualified domain name. I'm simply going to click on paste and check as if how many IP addresses are behind that. So you see this, v is equal to SPF IP4 colon with a CIDR value of 15. So there would be hundreds and thousands of IP addresses beneath this. There would be hundreds of IP addresses within these. So this is the first hop. Okay, when we check this is called as first hop. Now you again see the word getting include behind that, which means that there are still more IP addresses, because Microsoft is a big organization and it would be having hundreds and lakhs and millions of domains. So for those domains to be sent emails, it would require millions of IP addresses. So I am going to select this, I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to check as if what all IP addresses are there. So this was the first hop. This would be spfd.protection.outlook.com. This would be the second hop. If you see in now, I am not getting any include word in over here. So initially, like 4 to 5 years back, if we is to do a lookup on SPF record of Office 365, it is to give three IP addresses. But recently what we see is Microsoft has actually made a very good progress on it, and it has reduced one more hop. So this is one hop, this is one hop, and this is the second hop. So lesser the hop, faster is the access speed. Okay, so by default it is a universal rule that an SPF record cannot look up with more than 10 hops. People with big organizations do not know as of what is the requirement of SPF, and in that case, if you have deployed more than 10 records or 10 FQDNs, so let's say there is 11 or 12, so sometimes your emails would get delivered and sometimes it would not. Why? Because for the remaining two hops it is simply not being supported by the external DNS. Okay, so if the at that time, if the email sending server would be using the IP address which would be there on the 11th hop, so the external DNS is never going to get that IP address, and it is simply going to block that email from the recipient side. So it is always being recommended, and there is no such resolution for this one other than reducing down your hops. Microsoft being the biggest organization of the world, if Microsoft can just end it in two hops, why not the other organizations? It is just that you should be taking in an approach as if how to get this implemented with the help of networking, because this is completely being a part of network deployment with the help of the CIDR values. You see the CIDR getting with 32 hop with octet with 27 octet in over here. So it totally depends on how you would process or function this. So at the max, my SPF record cannot look up for hops which takes in more than 10 hops. So this is just like one hop and 10 hops. Took it, you can say it as a hop or a lookup. This basically are the other lookups which we can relate it with lookups. Now walking back to our third part, you can also add your own IPs, but yes, you need to make sure that you would be adding your IP addresses with IP4 colon then the IP address, so that IP addresses would be considered as a valid sender. And at the recipient side, whenever the recipient would check for your SPF record and if the connection is coming from that specific IP address, it is going to mark that email as a legitimate email. If it is failed to be able to scan that email with that IP address, it is going to fail that email and it would take its necessary action. So there it is, how SPF works. I've totally explained you the entire functioning by showing that if your this one just gives you an example that if your domain is this and you'll send your emails to your employees and customers from user1 and domain.com. So your employees, the customers would always be checking the SPF record for domain.com, and if it has a valid IP address as 192.168.0.1, so always these IP addresses would be checked by your customers and would check that whether this IP address belongs to domain.com or not. If it belongs to it and if it is a valid sender to be able to send emails, then the customers EOP filtering services would allow that email to enter into their organization. If not, it is going to block it. And this is the stuff where the attackers takes in the time and injects their own external DNS and they try to add these IP addresses. So what they try to do is they would try to manipulate this by using domain.com. They can get this domain, but they can never get these IP addresses in over here because IP addresses would ever be different for their side. And this is the way through which one can easily bypass with SPF, and SPF could easily get failed when someone would be trying to spoof your domain. The person would not be able to spoof within the IP address, but definitely someone would easily be able to spoof your domain by getting the same domain name and trying to spoof with that, because this domain name is no one in the world can, if you this domain.com is already purchased, you cannot send purchase the same domain. Anyone in the world can do that. So what the attacker would try to do is the attacker would try to send an email on the behalf of this domain, that is domain.com, but it is actually owned by the original person with that IP address. So whenever someone would be trying to send an email using domain.com, definitely the IP address would be different. It would not be 192.168.0.1, but indeed it would be 1.2.3.4. And at the recipient side, when the recipient receives it, ideally the recipient would check for domain.com and the IP should be this. But when the recipient checks it, the recipient would see that domain.com and the email is coming from IP 1.2.3.4, but this is not a valid sender because the IP address which is added into the external DNS is this. And literally attacker would try to do this and try to spoof your emails, and automatically your domain's reputation would go down, and that email would be considered as a fishy email, and on the basis of it, it is going to get it listed as a spam email. And at the last, if you see SPF records exceeds the DNS 10 lookup limit. So if there is a lookup of 10, it is not going to get processed, and that is the biggest limitation with SPF record. And there is no other solution other than to be able to low down your SPF limit. Okay, this is all about SPF record. What next? Then the second thing which comes into the picture, which is the second hierarchy part of it, is DKIM. DKIM records, domain keys identified mail. Unlike you publish a TXT record for an SPF record and for a DMARC record, if you would be publishing your DKIM record for any other services apart from Microsoft, it would be a TXT record only. But within Office 365, Office 365 uses a mechanism of encrypting emails with envelopes and decrypting emails at the other side. But in this case, Microsoft does not uses the TXT record. Indeed, it uses the CNAME records. So CNAMEs are the proud callers. I mean, there would be someone else who would be listening behind that, that is completely being a part of the DNS recording system in over here. But with this way, what does DKIM does? If you see, DKIM uses a public and a private key to sign messages as opposed to the published TXT record. Meaning that yes, whenever someone would be trying to send an email, okay, so that email, along with that email, there would also be a private key which would be get sent across that email. And once the DNS receives it, so at the recipient side, using the DNS, because we would be publishing these two records CNAME into the DNS, so that DNS record would actually contain a public key, and with the help of that public key, it would be decrypting those emails and it would be sending it across, so that the recipient can find and check in that the sender is actually a valid sender and an authorized sender, and the emails are going to be attached, or sent across by that, and it could easily see up those emails. And since there is a limitation of SPF where someone can easily spoof the domain using the domain name, so to overcome that, Microsoft came up with or email services came up with the feature called as DKIM feature. So what this would do is, even if someone would be trying to spoof in your domain, but they would not be able to get an attack with you, because this time the sign-in method would continue with the help of the public and the private key, and with the help of these keys, your emails are your messages going through the channel are going to get encrypted and are going to get decrypted if it gets the exact sign. If the messages does not get the exact envelope header, then the emails are going to get dropped, and whatever action which is being set on the other side for DKIM records, automatically it is going to mark that email as a fishy or a spam email. And in order to set up a DKIM record for your Office 365, as I've told you, you actually need to set up two CNAME records. So if you are going to set up two CNAME records, which would looks like this: selector one domain key. So, and these are the two DKIM records in over here. If you are going to publish this, so these are the values which you need to publish into your external DNS. So for my tenant, I believe I have enabled it way back time for this domain. So this is my domain, and if you see this, it is disabled right now, because if I try to enable this, it is going to give a query to the external DNS and check whether nuri12.com domain exists or not. The domain itself is expired from GoDaddy. So even if I'll try to go ahead and click on enable, you see you'd be getting an error stating that it would generate two values for you, and it would say that these are the two values which is being generated by this DKIM domain, and kindly publish these two values into your external DNS. Once you publish it, just come here and click on enable. So the moment you would be enabling this, you would see that your DKIM is enabled, and it is DKIM protected. So if you see CNAME records does not exist for this configuration, please publish the following two CNAME records. This is the first one, points to till here. Okay, this is my first DNS record, and this is my second DNS record, which ends up over here. If you've already published these two CNAME records, sync will take some few time, and once it gets published into your specific existing DNS, then you can just go ahead and click on this enable button, and once this is enabled, I can easily switch my keys, because 2 CNAME means two rotating keys. Now I just have this domain with me. I can just show you the DKIM is actually enabled on this. I did check it long back that it was enabled for one of my domain. Let us quickly check. Once this page gets loaded, we are going to check this. Till the time it opens this up, what I would do is, if there's any email of mine, let's say this email, or if there would have been any email coming from Gmail, because Office 365 would have definitely checked for those emails coming from. So yes, this is my Gmail's email address, and what I can quickly do is I'll just get and grab the headers for you, so you can check. These are the headers, and how to check whether uh, DKIM, DMARC, and all these things are getting tested for an email or not. There it is. If you see this, for this domain, DKIM is already enabled, and if it's being enabled, you can simply rotate these keys. So sometimes it would be using the first CNAME, and the some other time it would be using the other CNAME bracket. So if we keep on rotating these keys, it would be pretty tough for a user or for the attacker to be able to manipulate with this domain and have a look on this. But what happens is, hackers or attackers, to an extent, they already purchase this domain and try to manipulate with this, and what they tend to do is, to a certain limit or an extent, even at sometimes DKIM breakers do not get in configured, and at that instance what happens is, they even DKIM to an extent gets failed if it is not being published. So to overcome that, basically these are called as two headers: P1 headers and P2 headers. When I say P1 headers, that is actually the original senders, the mail from address, and when I say P2 header, it is just the from address, the display name. Using these two terminologies, the email could get easily manipulated, and with the help of the EOP, the filtering services, would get confused, and on the basis of that, an email could get marked as spam. Whether it could be a false positive kind of a scenario wherein an email was actually expected to be getting and delivered to the inbox, but it get delivered to the spam, and vice versa. So these things happens when the attackers try to make any manipulations within these domains in here. So this is all from the DKIM side, as of how we would be configuring the DKIM bracket, and this is how a DKIM bracket looks like, and it secures in with your external DNS. Now the last one, the DMARC bracket, or domain based message authentication, the toughest one, and this, you can consider this as a policy, as a DMARC policy. Just keep one thing in mind: your DMARC bracket would only get triggered if your P1 header gets failed, your P1 and P2 headers. So the simple formula to be able to remember this is, if P1 is not equal to P2. Now when I say P1, that is mail from. If that does not get matched with P2, that is the from address, your DMARC record gets executed. And because if P1 is would not be equal to P2, your SPF would get failed, your DKIM would get failed, and once both of them get failed, then automatically, if you have published a DMARC record for your tenant, or I'm sorry, for your domain, then automatically this would get triggered. Now how this would get triggered is, and what is the typical way to be able to check within these emails in over here. So these are the values for a DMARC record to be getting in published. V is equal to DMARC1. P is equal to the point of action. So when you say P is equal to, it would be the point of action, whether you would like to do any changes or none of the changes. This is the by default action for a DMARC record. The other two actions are reject the email or quarantine the email. If you set the action as P is equal to reject, then automatically, if the DMARC policy gets triggered, and if it finds that email as not a valid sender, what it is going to do is, it is simply going to reject that message. If we are going to set this as quarantine, according to this policy in over here, it is almost would quarantine that email. PCT represents percentage, how many percentage. If you would be aligning this as 100%, then yes, it would be very strict. If you would be aligning this as 50%, so it would be like a 50-50 kind of a good go. It would similarly be acting in as an intelligence and artificial intelligence, and what sender's reputation would be, and the basis of that it would make its own decision. And these things in over here, RUA and RUF, these are basically the aggregated addresses in over here. So if there would be anything which needs to be reported, it would be getting it reported to these addresses in over here, and automatically the fiction the reporting um, um, what do we say, I'm just not being able to gather that word, whatever action we would be setting up to that DMARC record, automatically it would be getting in forwarded to these addresses in over here. You can set up your own email addresses and you would be getting in those reports or those stuffs in at that site. So this would be all from the DMARC side. I do not have any such DMARC actually published, or I've showed you that option as if you know where to check it. But yes, what I can show you from my side is how to check this from an email header. Whenever you would be receiving in an email, and you can also only do the headers check on the emails which you receive, not the ones through which you send. You'd only be able to check it. So this one's in over here would be checking as if you know what all happened with this email. This email is considered to be a non-spam. So if you would go with this field which is called as authentication results, there it is, the very first record itself. This one would be giving you a close glimpse of all the records. If you see, so this email came from Google, and Google has actually published it because the sender here was let me check. We usually see the from address. Oh, there it is. So this is Gmail. So Gmail has actually sent an email to Microsoft. So whenever Gmail sends an email, as I've told you, these services, so these all are the records and IP addresses for Gmail. And who checked and validated it? Microsoft checked it. So because Gmail had all of its record, you see SPF. So SPF for this record, you see this SPF mail from. Now if you want to confirm, so the last IP address which handed over the email to Microsoft was this IP address. You see, that is the reason that SPF is getting passed. We can quickly check this. That would be set q is equal to um, I'm just not being able to check. Let me check. Trace search. You see, this shows of Google mail-vs.1.com. So this IP address belongs to Google, and that is the reason. So this IP address, as per Google's record, is authorized to set emails over the internet, and that is the reason that SPF record in over here got passed. Similarly, when SPF record got passed, it also included with DKIM, and it verified the signature and with these headers in over there, and it verified it, due to which DKIM record also got passed. And at the end, if you see in over here, by default the action is always set to none. So even if this action check would have been failed automatically, if the action over here would have been set to quarantine, then Office 365 would have quarantined that email address. Okay, so this is all the action. So this action is actually set. So this is the action. If let's say if this was set to quarantine, so Google has defined that if you find this getting failed, just quarantine that email message. Okay, and Microsoft is the recipient who would be checking with this settings, and Microsoft would automatically quarantine this. Okay, the percentage in over here is 100. Action is set to none, and DMARC is also getting in passed in over here. So this is the way through which you would actually be checking in on an email, as how to check SPF record, DKIM record, and DMARC record, and why is it important. So you are the one who would be publishing it, but it would always be getting in checked at the recipient side. Okay, and these are the most important records. If you would not be having these records, there are higher chances that your spam filters are going to mark those emails as spam or as quarantine, depending on what configuration you have made it at your side. So this was all from my side for this specific video. If you have any further questions on this, or any doubts which you feel that you are not being able to go through with that or make it understand, you can contact us anytime at info@alifconsulting.com. That would be all from my side for this session. Thank you, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed it. You take care of yourself and you stay safe. Bye bye.